What drugs were like in World War I. When a soldier goes off to war in our modern times, he or she can expect to take powerful drugs on a regular basis. For instance, a soldier who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder may be prescribed benzodiazepines for anxiety. An injured warrior might be given amphetamines to mask pain and stay alert during recovery. These medicines are carefully regulated by the military today, but this was not always the case. Throughout history, soldiers have turned to drugs of various types and strengths as a means of coping with physical injuries and psychological trauma. The battlefield is an extremely stressful place, so it makes sense that the combatants would try to find relief wherever they could. In this, we will try to explore what drugs were like in World War I and how it affected our soldiers on the front line, and how it changed their lives forever. So please do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and let's get started. World War I is known as the first industrialized war, but it was also the first pharmaceutical war. Drugs were used to treat soldiers' wounds and injuries, an innovation that came about because of their long-lasting nature. At this point in history, doctors had not yet learned to effectively clean battlefield wounds with an antiseptic solution. Instead, they used drugs such as morphine and cocaine, both addictive, to numb the pain during the surgery, and then applied dressings soaked in iodine or oil of wintergreen, which didn't help infection either. This lack of medical care led many soldiers to suffer from depression and addiction after returning home from combat. To treat these conditions, doctors prescribed heroin, the most powerful opiate available at the time, as well as amphetamine pills made from chemicals found in poppy plants, which are now illegal. These drugs were sometimes given out without prescription by unscrupulous doctors who wanted nothing more than quick cash payments from desperate customers who needed help managing their withdrawal symptoms after being discharged from service due to injury or illness. In World War I, doctors often used cocaine and amphetamines to help soldiers stay awake. Cocaine was even used to treat fatigue and headaches. The drug was often administered to soldiers in the form of cigarettes and gum. Doctors also used cocaine and amphetamines as stimulants since they made it easier for soldiers to stay awake during long shifts at the front lines. Soldiers in World War I used heroin as a cough suppressant. You might have heard the term heroin used to refer to a drug that helps people deal with pain. However, when you look at World War I and the soldiers who fought in it, you'll see another side of the story, one that's less about relieving pain and more about feeling euphoria. Soldiers were looking for any way they could to get rid of their stress and anxiety during wartime, so it's no surprise that some turned to drugs for relief. Opium was one of the first drugs used to treat soldiers. Opium is an addictive drug that was used as a painkiller and to treat other conditions, such as diarrhea and insomnia. It was also used to treat anxiety, depression, addiction to other drugs like morphine or cocaine, and even just general fatigue. In addition to its use in treating war-related injuries, opium was also popular among soldiers for recreational purposes. Soldiers would smoke it in pipes or chew on raw opium leaves. They would even mix it into their food or drink it in tea. The use of opium by soldiers was not without controversy. Some military doctors believed that it caused apathy in patients who were ill and unable to recuperate properly. However, the vast majority supported its use because it helped prevent unnecessary deaths during wartime. Although opium smoking was forbidden by the military, it remained popular among soldiers during World War I. The military banned opium smoking in 1915 because of concerns about its addictive nature and health consequences, such as addiction. However, later that year, when supplies of alcohol ran low for soldiers in France, the British Army allowed some troops to smoke opium. During the war, morphine was a standard treatment for wounds. In the midst of a war, soldiers were in constant danger. The fear of death, in addition to serious physical injuries, can be traumatizing. To combat this trauma and help treat wounds, morphine was given to soldiers who were wounded on the battlefields of World War I. Morphine is an opioid that acts as a pain reliever and sedative when taken by mouth or injection into the body. It can also cause euphoria and drowsiness when given at high doses for recreational use, but it is often used in hospitals today due to how effective it is at dulling pain signals sent from injured areas of the body back down through the nerve pathways until they reach areas like our spinal cord or brainstem where sensory perception originates, though some people do abuse this drug. Cocaine was very popular during World War I because its effects were thought to be stimulating and restorative. Soldiers used it as a stimulant in order to stay awake on long missions and for its restorative properties when combined with alcohol. Cocaine was also believed to be an effective treatment for anxiety, an affliction that plagued many veterans after they returned home. The widespread use of cocaine and opiates gave way to the use of cannabis indica to treat battlefield injuries during World War I. As a result, many soldiers returned home with debilitating addiction issues that continue to plague them today. A cannabis indica strain was also used for pain relief during World War I, but it was also prescribed as an anti-anxiety aid. That's because cannabis indica has no unpleasant after effects and is very effective in destroying nightmares, according to reports at the time. A lot of soldiers got addicted to morphine and cocaine on the battlefield. The drugs that soldiers took to dull their pain and anxiety weren't just given out by doctors. They were also sometimes provided by other soldiers. A lot of men got hooked on morphine and cocaine, which were the most commonly used drugs at the time. Some men became addicted after taking them for their injuries or because they didn't know how dangerous they were. Others did it deliberately in order to deal with their experiences on the battlefield. They did feed the troops alcohol in World War I because it was viewed as sort of something to help them calm down their nerves and it helped them sleep better at night. Alcohol is a depressant. What this means is that it slows down your brain and body, making you feel relaxed. In large amounts, alcohol can even make you sleepy or dizzy. That's why it's often used as a sleep aid or as a way to calm down jittery nerves. However, if you drink too much alcohol in one sitting, or over time, it can become toxic to the human body and cause intense nausea or vomiting, also known as getting sick. Amphetamines were used to keep soldiers awake on long missions. It's always been used as a stimulant, which is why we sometimes use it now for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Amphetamines also have some antidepressant effects, which is why they're sometimes used to treat depression. But because amphetamines increase energy levels and make people feel good, they're also frequently abused as recreational drugs. Abuse comes with its own set of risks. While it may seem like amphetamine use is harmless at first or even beneficial, it can cause side effects like panic attacks or psychosis if you don't take breaks from taking the drug over time. In addition to these dangers, long-term abuse could lead to addiction, an extremely difficult condition for anyone to overcome alone. Because these risks are so high for users who don't know how much is too much, we urge everyone who wants to help with their addiction problems now more than ever before, especially those who work closely with other people who may not realize how serious this issue truly is. Treatment for addiction became a big problem after World War I. After the war, treatment for addiction became a big problem. Many soldiers became addicted to morphine and cocaine during their time in the field and had a hard time getting clean after they returned home. Drug abuse rose dramatically during World War I, and this trend continued for generations afterward. A lot of people think that drug abuse only became common in the 1960s, but that's not true. Drug addiction was a problem even during World War I, which ended 100 years ago this month. Soldiers on both sides were given morphine and cocaine to help with pain relief, but many became addicted to these drugs as well. After the war was over and soldiers returned home from Europe and Asia, many struggled with their physical health and mental well-being. They were traumatized by what they had seen during battle, had trouble sleeping at night because of nightmares about being injured or killed by an enemy soldier, or maybe even dying alone, and experienced flashbacks when they heard loud noises like gunfire or explosions going off nearby. Some veterans turned to alcohol or prescription medications like codeine syrup, which is basically just watered-down morphine, to cope with these symptoms, but unfortunately, it didn't work very well. World War I was a dark time in history for many reasons, including drugs. The use of drugs was a relatively new phenomenon at the time, and their use was not necessarily seen as negative. In fact, doctors believed that drugs could help treat soldiers who were suffering from a variety of physical and mental ailments. The number of soldiers suffering from these conditions was staggering. Approximately 1 out of every 4 men who served in the war experienced some kind of illness during their service. Doctors prescribed opiates like morphine to alleviate pain and suppress coughs. They also gave out stimulants, such as cocaine, to boost energy levels or reduce fatigue. Many soldiers became addicted to these substances while fighting overseas. When they returned home after the war ended, many faced serious withdrawal symptoms upon trying to stop using them cold turkey without medical supervision. Over time, this contributed heavily to what became known as the Great Morphine Craze, an epidemic where users would take excessive amounts of opiate-based drugs in order to get high because there wasn't any other way for them to cope with everyday life back at home once they had become so used. The First World War was the beginning of a drug crisis. In the years following World War I, there was an unprecedented rise in drug use around the world. Opiates were especially popular among soldiers who had been exposed to them during the war. These soldiers used opiates not to ease pain or suffering, but because they wanted to forget about their traumatic experiences on the battlefield. The same thing happened when World War II began. Many troops returning from that war also became addicted to drugs like morphine and heroin as a way of coping with PTSD and other psychological issues stemming from wartime trauma. Those who haven't addicted themselves often knew someone who was. Having spent time in close quarters with so many people, it would have been difficult to not know someone with a substance abuse problem, or at least hear rumors. During this time period, it wasn't just military personnel who were using drugs. General public awareness of narcotic substances increased dramatically during both world wars thanks to propaganda campaigns designed specifically for purposes such as enlistment drives or recruitment efforts by pharmaceutical companies looking for new clients and customers, elderly people, but also due largely because so many soldiers themselves returned home being dependent upon opioids like morphine, something which showcased how common addiction really is today when one considers how widespread prescription medications are within society today, and therefore gave ordinary citizens an idea about how addictive these substances can be if taken improperly over long periods of time without medical supervision. The First World War was a dark time in history for many reasons, including drugs. We hope this article has given you some insight into why so many soldiers became addicted to them and how treatment for addiction became a big problem after the war. It's also important to remember that this trend continued for generations afterward as well. Thanks for watching! World War II was a tough time for everyone, and drugs were no exception. Comment below if you have any questions, and be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.